Welcome to Quit to Win, the show where we explore the moments people had to let go of destructive pattern, limiting identity, and the internal battle in order to rebuild their life with purpose and clarity. Our today's guest is Brheanna Myers, founder of Light and Breezy Coaching, creators of the Awaken Your Potential method, certified HHT practitioner, a quantum energy healer, spiritual coach, and author of Awaken Your Potentials and Healing Frequency Made Easy. It's really a pleasure and honor to have you on the show. Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maya.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Also, Maya, you named that experience in 2020 forced you to quit. What was the life you were living before that happened?
Yeah, so I guess we'll go to 2017 was when I first started really having my what we call a spiritual awakening. I was starting to see the illusions of everything that I had created in my life, this character I had created. So I owned a farm. I was doing like direct to consumer meat products, things like that, which I enjoyed, but it wasn't what I was supposed to do. And then when my near death experience happened in 2020, I was shown that I had a exit clause in my soul contract, and they told me I knew I was going to be taking on a very difficult life and that I wanted to have an exit strategy to check in and be like, do you want to go home or do you want to come back here? And they basically told me when I come back, I will be on my spiritual journey and this will be the life I will be taking on. And they were not lying. I was violently
Yeah.
shoved into what we call a spiritual awakening.
Yeah, wow. That was really a whole lot. And yeah, a whole lot to really came from. So when you came back, what did you know immediately would never be the same?
I wanted to change my answer and go back.
Yeah.
The first thing that happened was when I came back in my body, I immediately had regret and because I had fungal pneumonia. So that's what ended up ultimately killing me. And so my body was in so much pain. I just remember they came in to check my vitals and I was like really, really low. The machine was screaming when they were checking my vitals. And I was like, no, it's supposed to be like that. So I was immediately filled with regret that I chose to come back here. But then I got on what we call that spiritual high. The doctor told me that I was going to have this very long recovery. I was back at like 100% in like a day. So the spontaneous healing. So I started to really research the body, the energy system to the mind. And I started really understanding all these different stories about people that spontaneously healed from like even cancer. I mean, there's so many stories out there about these healing. And what had happened with me was one of those things. I was supposed to have a very long recovery because there was so much damage in my lungs, but I didn't. I was right back at it. So I started really researching and I was on this spiritual high. And then ultimately, what always happens when you start going through a major awakening is my life just started to crumble around me. And that's kind of what I help people with because we think being awakened is this like moment in the sun and it's like oh, everything's great, right? It's actually very destructive and it comes as, your foundation being broke apart, your life falling apart. I went through a divorce, sold my farm, all of these things fell apart, but then I was also getting a lot of resources. I was meeting shamans that were helping to teach me shamanism. I worked with healers all over the world. We have this beautiful, Zoom now, we can connect.
Yeah.
But I had all these people start reaching out to me. And so I knew it was part of my destined path. So I just kind of got in flow state and started to, follow the guidance.
Wow. Isn't a whole lot of things to actually get kind of unpack there. You having to kind of come back, and the minute you came back, you start regretting a whole lot of couples of things, and the machine was screaming into a whole lot of symptoms that was coming into being. Yeah, it's really amazing. Survival mode is something you help others live. Were you in it yourself before 2020, and what did it look like for you?
So here's the thing that I think a lot of people so one of the other things I was shown in my near death experience was the separation of illusion, right? Or the illusion of separation. We are not separate from anything. Everything is entangled and every single part of your journey is significant. And so before 20, we could go all the way back to my childhood. I had what we call an imaginary friend, but she wasn't imaginary to me. And I spent all my time with her name was Apple Pie. But then when I started to really work with my spirit guides, I had 3 at the time, and this was back in 2021 when I really was able to communicate with them. But there was always this energy off to the distance that didn't come forward. And about a year later, the energy finally stepped forward, and it was apple pie. She had been with me the whole time, and she was guiding me and helping me in my progression all the way back in childhood. So I always tell people, I'm like, your journeys start from the moment you get here. It's when we start to accept that the person we created to survive is not who we are, it all starts to unravel. And so, yes, I was very much, even if you go back into what I loved to do as a kid, was research history. I loved history, not the kind they teach you in school, but I knew I was being lied to, right? I knew. So I would go into finding old journals. Like I spent a lot of time in the library. I still do because I don't even truly trust Google. So all of that though, now all that history that I had taken in is very much relevant to what I do now. And so we're always on this path and we're always in the awakening. It's just when we start to put the pieces together that that was who we truly are. And it wasn't just a hobby, like before my awakening, now I'm a remote viewer and, I Akashic Records reader. Before that, though, my friends and family would say that I was just a plethora of useless knowledge, but I was collecting knowledge that would one day be beneficial to what I was doing on my path. So we're always on this journey. It's just when you start to look at it and how it's all connected.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, for sharing. So coming back from near-death experience, sound like a gift. Was there parts of it that felt like grief?
Yes. So after that first year, I kind of talked about how I went to the spiritual high. And then for about a year, I went to a really deep low because I felt like I was doing something wrong. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I talk a lot about this. I actually have a book I just wrote about how we don't even think about grief. We think of grieving the loss of someone or something, right? But I actually realized I was grieving the person that I used to be because that person got me to where I was. So you have a lot of compassion for that past version of yourself. And you don't realize that to go forward and to really move it into the life you were meant to live, you have to let go of that version of you. And it's like losing someone you love, someone that's been there for you, because that version of you is the one that took the hits for you to survive to get to where you were. So yes, there was a lot of grief and grief that you don't really think about until you're going through it. And then like I said, I went through a lot of loss at that time. So I was grieving that as well. But luckily I had some great support. I had some great healers that were around me, and that really helped keep me on the forward path. And in 3, I had spontaneous Kundalini awakenings. For anyone that doesn't know what that means, at the base of your spine is your root chakra, and there's dormant energy, and it basically shoots up your pranic tube or your spine and connects you to your higher self. And it feels like an energy bomb that goes off in you. And after that, I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep for 30 days. I worked very closely with shamans. Yep. Every time I would fall or go to like lay down, I would astral project. I started to spontaneously remote view. I didn't know how to control it. And so this was all happening. So then it was a lot of confusion and a lot of, I don't want to say fear, but like, when is this going to end? Am I ever going to be normal again? I was channeling rapidly and so I was like hearing voices. And often when someone has a Kundalini awakening like this, they end up in like the hospital for psychosis because we don't know how to diagnose these things or we don't properly diagnose these things. So I know a lot of people that have gone through a Kundalini awakening like that were put in a mental institution to try to help them because everybody thought they just lost their mind. But really, you're just opening up to higher divine channels and you're channeling depending on who you're channeling, but angelic realms. And so, yeah, it's very confusing. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, really a whole lot. And having on to sleep for like 30 days, I'm like, what? How did she do that? And the fact that you just make reference of a whole lot of things, it just speaks volumes to it. So how did you move from that particular experience into building a coaching practice? What were the step in between the moments and the mission?
Well, I knew right when I came back in 2020 that spiritual practice was where I was heading. It wasn't until the Kundalini awakening where everything came on where I really found my belief like in what I was capable of doing. And this is what happens with a lot of people that have gifts that open up is we convince ourselves that that's not happening to us, or that we're crazy, or that was just in my mind, or that was a coincidence. All the things we tell ourselves, like a great one. Have you ever thought of someone and then they call you? That's telepathic communication. And we just write it off as, oh, what a weird coincidence. But you're sending a signal into the quantum field that their brain, which is also an antenna, picks up. And they're like, oh, I should call that person. But we like to say that it's coincidences. There is no coincidences. There are no accidents. We are far more powerful than we have been taught. And in fact, we've been limited by the powers that were to keep ourselves in this lower vibrational state. And so we were easier to control, and that is what's really happening on the Great Awakening that's happening globally in the collective.
Amazing, amazing. We are more powerful than what we think we are. That was really amazing. And thank you so much for sharing. So who or what anchor you why everything was shifting?
Why was everything shifting? Or what?
Yes,
Sorry,
yes,
say it again.
who or what anchor you why everything was shifting from one form to the other?
Well, I think that everything had to shift because in order to make great change, so this is where I work with a lot of clients. So this is a good way to kind of segue this. So when we go through an awakening, we go through that depression, we go through the confusion, then there's a place of the in between. You're 1 foot into the past, 1 foot into the future. Where people get hung up is that in between, where they are to step past or integrate into that future timeline or the version of themselves that they authentically are. And so for me, that was probably the biggest hurdle for me, was to the grief that you feel because you're almost like holding on to that person because it's what you know, but the fear of, stepping out into this. I remember for me, I was, doing spiritual coaching, and I'm like, who am I to tell anybody, anything? And so that doubt creeps up, but it was when I started to really anchor in my ability and, know that it was a divine gift and that I am using this to help with what's happening in the new earth. I mean, we're shifting entire dimensional planes right now on earth. That's why we're having so many, mass awakenings, or, the Schumann is upticking. There's a lot of things that are happening that are shifting us into the 5D. And it's getting past that hurdle of leaving the 3D behind to pursue the 5D version of ourselves, or reconnecting to our higher self.
Mm, amazing. Sometimes we actually get to complete it, and yeah, amazing. So looking back at your life in 2020, is there something you wish you would have uh quit before the experience forced you to?
Had I quit? Yeah, I think I wish I would have quit doubting myself. I mean, for me, I lived a lifetime of trauma, so I lost my voice. I didn't lose it, I gave it away. And I kept letting other people make decisions for me, and I didn't trust that I knew what was best for me. And I wish that I had, allowed myself earlier on to stand up for my own voice. But I also know all things happen as they're supposed to happen. So, I was meant to do exactly what I was doing. So I tell a lot of my clients, I'm like, whenever things get hard, remember that, especially for people that are trying to quit something, this is we beat ourselves up on this because we'll start to try to quit something and then we might regress back into it and then we try again. And we start to think that we're weak. It's not a weakness. It's that you weren't ready. You didn't have the tools yet, maybe, or, you're not ready to quit that, or it's still serving a purpose in your timeline. All things happen as they're supposed to happen. So I think giving ourselves more compassion would really help people to actually quit what they're trying to quit, as far as, whatever it is, having more compassion that, we're right where we're supposed to be at all
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, we are where we ought to be at the right time. Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. So you help people navigate awaken our safely now. What do most people do that make the process harder than it's done it?
So I tell everybody, we as a human being, we are storytellers, right? Every culture for millennia, we are storytellers, and we tell ourselves a story. And that story often is not true. We often lie to ourselves to either cope with survival, to continue to live the life that we think we're supposed to be living. And so the first thing I always tell people is, sit down and tell yourself the truth. Tell yourself the story that is authentic, because once you start to like move from authenticity, we can actually start breaking apart what we took on as a core belief that's not ours. We carry so much of other people's things. And so this is where I go into like the subconscious patterns, because your subconscious takes in everything. Every single thing unfiltered is in your subconscious from every lifetime you've ever lived. Your consciousness is on a constant filter. It is filtering out information you may not want to know, need, or whatever to make sense of your environment. A great example is this is have you ever learned a new word that you had never heard before, learn the definition, and then you hear it 5 times that week?
Yeah.
And you're like, I never knew that word. And now I hear it everywhere because your brain is filtering constantly until it wasn't until you brought it to the forefront and then made the conscious connection that you see that word everywhere. And this is what happens in the subconscious patterns and why it's so hard to quit a pattern because that is not brought to the consciousness yet. So I like to connect those dots. And the way you can start doing that is telling yourself an authentic story.
Tell yourself an authentic stories and make it easier. And yeah, amazing. This has really been amazing. So lastly, what does rebuilding an identity after something like this actually requires spirituality, practical, and emotionally?
Say that one more time. You cut out in the
Yeah.
first part.
What does rebuilding an identity after something like this require?
Yeah. So your identity so I'll associate this. So identity is your nervous system. Okay. So
Yeah.
those two are correlated. So to actually break that old identity, you want to address the nervous system. Does this make me feel safe? That's a big one. So we often, for our identity, will continue to live what we feel feels familiar. So I always tell people, like, the first thing you want to do is something making you feel unsafe, even though it's not, because your nervous system doesn't know the difference between something new, that same frequency in the nervous system, or being attacked by a bear, right? Your nervous system still proceeds it the same way because your nervous system doesn't know words, right? So you want to create that safety in the nervous system to create the new identity.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. This has really been amazing. So, for my audience who love to call, reach out to you, especially more like as a coach, to guide them through spiritual awakening. How can they reach out to you? And where is the best platform?
Yeah, so everything that I do, all my services, my books are all on my website. You can go to lightandbreezycoaching.com. So it's LIGHT and breezy, BREEZY coaching.com. And you can find links on there. You can email me on there. You can do a contact form with me. I do a once a month nervous system circle where I do a live Zoom where we do 30 minutes where I teach concepts. This one I have tomorrow is we're going to do energy protection, and then I do an energy healing session, and then we do a 30-minute Q&A, and that's people find really beneficial because it's a group environment and it's a lot of like-minded people who are also experiencing the same trials and tribulations that come with an awakening. And then it's community. So we all talk together and it's really nice because it's hard to find people that understand. That was one thing I really struggled with was I didn't know who to talk to because the people that I lived around did not understand. They still don't. Like
Yeah.
most of my people are now in other countries, and so I really wanted to bring a place where people could feel safe to talk about these things and to voice their concerns, opinions, struggles, heartaches, all those.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Brheanna. Your story is a reminder that sometimes the most profound transformation doesn't come from decisions. It's come from moments that decide for you. Yeah, this has really been amazing. Thank you for what you do and thank you for creating a platform that actually more like give expression to those being able to kind of have like-minded to discuss those podcasts. Yes, it's really a pleasure and honor to be on the show.
Yeah. And I think I'll leave us with your listeners, but remember that you are enough. Like, I think the biggest thing that people are struggling with is I'm not enough. And I tell everybody, I'm like, we are human beings, not human doings. So be more present, be yourself, be who you are, because that is enough. We think we have to do stuff to earn love or to gain in the world, and that's very inaccurate. Come in together, find your center, and be, and that's all you have to do, and everything else will come to you.
Yeah, amazing. It just speak for them. So yeah, be your authentic self every now and then. Yeah, be a human being, not a human doing it. This has really been amazing. Thank you so much for leaving us with this last quote. And definitely from our audience who love to reach out, so, definitely the link is going to be on the show notes for you to easily reach out to her. Once again, a pleasure and honor have you on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.